So I think day one, that the day sitting in there was my worst day. I literally just wanted to be like, never mind, never mind. Undo. And then I will say, you just kind of have this moment of like, whether I decide to enjoy this or not decide to enjoy this, it's going to happen.
Hello and welcome to So You Want to Buy a Business. I'm your host, Kira Hamilton, and this podcast is all about the ups and downs of the ETA journey. We're going to get into some of those ups and downs today with my guest, Brittney Orellano, co-owner of radio-controlled garage door and gate in Kansas City. Here's our conversation. Brittney, welcome to So You Want to Buy a Business. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Let's start with an introduction. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes, my name is Brittney Orellano, and I own two businesses. I own a real estate and property management brokerage in Kansas City that's just entered its 10th year. And then I'm in 1 year of ownership by acquisition of a garage door and gate company.
1 year this month. That's huge. I actually just hit 1 year on my laundromat this month. So we were both buying a business a year ago in May. That's so cool.
Wow. That's awesome.
Great. Well, I have so much I want to talk to you about. Let's start with going back to the beginning of your ETA journey. How did you first learn about ETA and why was the idea of it appealing to you?
Sure. So we had been in ownership. My husband and I, we are partners on both businesses, and we're both very entrepreneurial, which means just kind of we are drawn to chaos, if you will. And so being in ownership of our startup of this real estate brokerage property management company, it's around 9 years, we had really plateaued as far as our involvement. It's pretty much self-sufficient, self-running. Everything is in a really stable place. We had hired ourselves out of pretty much all of our jobs there. And so that year was just kind of rough for us because we like the challenge of like our back against the wall and, it's sink or swim. As crazy as it sounds, that's just how we're both wired. And so I think we both had an itch like, okay, we've got to do something because this is just, this is not monotony. All of that is not what we thrive in. And so I heard a podcast. Unfortunately, do not remember the exact podcast, but I know that Cody Sanchez was a guest on the podcast. And I was obviously drawn to the fact that she was this like really intelligent entrepreneurial female, which we just don't have a ton of representation across platforms. So that was exciting to me to hear someone who I, thought sounded awesome talking about this. And we had considered selling our property management business, but had never occurred to us that we could be the buyers on a business. And so that was kind of like the paradigm shift for me, the light bulb going off of, well, maybe the answer isn't to sell, but to buy. And so that's kind of what kicked it off. So I heard that podcast in November and pretty much started looking for a business like the next day.
Oh, so if you acquired in May, that was a 6-month turnaround.
Yeah, we started looking in November and we were under contract by end of January.
And wow, you were under contract by end of January.
Yeah.
And then you actually closed on it in May. So that was a super quick turnaround. Wow. Okay. I want to know all about that. Tell me a little bit about what was your initial search criteria? Did you have any industry that you were looking into, any particular deal size?
Sure. Yeah. So we first put feelers out on property management companies because we were like, that made the most sense of where we could add on to our existing business. But then we started thinking about like a hub and spoke model of, well, is there a business we could purchase that our property management company could kind of feed into? Instead of trying to grow the doors, maybe start growing businesses that our property management business would feed. We then kind of on that journey, so we knew we wanted service because that's what we know. That's what we've always done. And that's kind of our comfort zone is something service industry. So then we were like, well, if we get something, because then we started looking at contracting companies or painting companies, and we thought, well, if we do something that is solely reliant on our property management company or we're our biggest customer, it kind of hamstrings us if we ever decided we wanted to sell the property management company. So
Right.
that's where we kind of were like, okay, scratch that. Like, cool if our property management company can be a customer, but really we wanted something that we just really liked the business as a standalone business in and of itself. And so what drew us to this is property management is a jack of all trades. Like, you're an accountant, a consultant, a therapist, like you are all of the things to everybody all of the time. And you work for the vendors, you work for the residents, you work for the owners. And so we were really drawn to this company specifically because it's very niche. And to us, it felt like, man, can you imagine just mastering and kind of trying to dominate a niche versus trying to do all of the things for everybody. So I think that's what got us excited about this one.
I don't think I mentioned this before, but I actually used to work in commercial property management in San Francisco.
Okay.
And then my husband and I also own a small multifamily and I manage that. So I'm empathetic to that. And I think you do have to have such a wide skill set. I think it's
Yeah.
actually great preparation for owning a different kind of business because you're doing so many different things, interacting with so many different types of people. You're in the financials, you might be in the legal side a little bit, you have operations experience, and it's kind of, you're familiar with sort of like the day-to-day hustle that can come along with operating a business.
Yeah.
Cool. So how did you actually find the business that you ended up acquiring? Was it through a broker, through a website?
Yeah. This one was on Biz by Sell.
And you
Um,
just reached out to the broker, or how did you go about it?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, you can see from the timeline, like once I'm like head set on something, I'm like a dog with a bone. So I was like, we are buying a business as quickly as legally possible because I was just all in, like, okay, this is my thing to be. So we were aggressively searching, like reaching out to contacts, reaching out to accountants that we work with, other people saying, hey, do you know anyone who might be interested in selling? So we were hitting it hard. But this one, yeah, it just happened to be on Biz by Sell. It was originally listed at like double the price. And so they had dropped the price pretty significantly. And so that's when it kind of got my interest.
And you talked about, the general type of business you were looking for. Tell me why this one specifically stood out and appealed to you.
Yeah. So this one, they had been in business for 60 years. So that was immediately something that I loved. I also, like I said, I loved how niche it was because although it's a garage and gate business, they really specialize in like high-end custom work. And so it's not necessarily the way it has been running, trying to do like every door in Kansas City. It's more doing really customized high-end doors for like custom home builders or gates. So I was just really drawn to that it wasn't necessarily a quantity play, it was a quality play, which was something in our property management business that's always set us apart also. We've always been really, really selective with the people we'll work with, just from experience our first year or so in business of being like, oh my gosh, we just need business, we'll take almost anything, to being like, just the 80-20 rule that are, the 20% of the properties that were in bad areas or difficult owners ended up taking 80% of our work. And so we have really built our property management company to be a pretty niche company where we'll just work with really specific owners and stuff. So anyways, that's what we were drawn to, is we felt like this company aligned with us in a lot of that.
Tell us the name of your company.
The garage door company is called Radio Controlled Garage Door and Gate. So it's a throwback.
Very cool. Let's get into the financials a little bit. What did you end up purchasing it for, and how did you finance the acquisition?
So we ended up purchasing it for just under $1 million. I don't remember the exact amount, but I do know we landed just under $1 million. As far as how we structured it, we ended up doing, I want to say it was like 40%, 30% SBA lending. Then we had the other half owner financing. And then we ended up doing a seller what is it, carryback or buyback? I'm losing the term for it now, but where they actually split the down payment with us also at the end of the loan, that note comes up. So we had restructured it so that we were only putting, I believe, 5% down. The other 5% came from the seller, and then the other half of the purchase price came from the seller also.
Tell me a bit about the SBA process. What was it like for you and for this deal?
It's intense. I mean, it was a lot. Like, we're pretty used to working with lenders just from being in the real estate world. So we were prepared for some of that, like, getting your blood drawn type stuff, all, I mean, them being all up in everything. But it was a very demanding process. I'm really organized. And like I said, when I'm on something, I'm driven. So fortunately, I was on top of everything. But I feel like my husband, for example, is, like not that way. And I think it would have been awful for him. So I think if someone was doing it alone and they're not like in the details on it, tracking everything, it could turn into a monster of a process. It's just a lot.
It's a lot of documentation that they're requesting. Underwriting is a lot of back and forth. Had you explored any other financing structures or financing options? Why did you decide to go SBA?
We did. I think it felt like the path of least resistance at the time. And we worked with Live Oak Bank, which was the one who, had the most tolerance for us being kind of creative in the way we structured the deal, where they would allow us to split the down payment. Our biggest thing throughout the entire thing was just cash on hand. We just really did not want to invest a dollar more upfront than we had to. We wanted to keep as much cash liquid as we could. So for us, that was kind of a non-negotiable. We were more negotiable on purchase price or other terms because that was our one thing that was like, we really want the seller to have skin in the game. And then if we can talk them into also splitting the down payment, even better. So Live Oak Bank was one of the only lenders that kind of had a tolerance for that.
And so you said you had an offer signed in January. Is that right? Or a contract signed in January, and then
Yeah.
you closed in May. What was going on in between that time? Was it just figuring out financing, or were you negotiating with the seller on anything?
It was really the seller's timeline. Like I said, once we got the financing how we wanted it, we were really laid back about everything else. We didn't have like a hard, we need this to happen by this time or whatever. We're kind of big picture as it is. We just knew we wanted the business, so however long it took. But he was doing a million and one things in preparation for the sale, and so he needed time because there was an office there present that used to be like a sixplex that he was converting into an office, so he had to finish that project. And he was actually, upon closing, packing up everything and sailing with his family for the foreseeable future. So it was a unique situation that he had a lot to tie up by closing. And so I would say a majority of it was just allowing time for him to tie up all of his loose ends. And then everything else was just kind of like bank timing. We didn't have any extensions. We didn't have any like hiccups, nothing like that. It was just kind of the timeline that, everyone felt comfortable with.
Well, you still moved very fast on this. I mean, a lot of people who are searching takes at least a year, sometimes longer than that. So tell me a little bit about lessons learned from your search and any advice you would give to people who are searching for a business for the first time.
Yeah, that's a great question. Lessons learned, I would say, I don't even know. It's so easy, like hindsight, like being able to see things so clearly. So I think I would have advocated for ourselves a lot more than we did. My husband and I, even though I am super driven, we're also really laid back. And so we're always just looking at like the big picture of like, we just want the business. So, however that needs to work for this guy to make him feel comfortable. But after he left, I just realized how much we did not advocate for ourselves. Like I did not push for specific sit downs or specific information because the guy was spinning like a top. He was so overwhelmed with everything he had going on. So I was just kind of like, all right, I kind of realized within days, really our first day there, I'm like, I'm not going to get any training from this guy. Like, I'm not going to get any. He had reservations about being in a room alone with me because he was a man and I was a woman. He's kind of old school, and so that had obviously constraints as far as what I could learn, because he just wasn't comfortable having those conversations. So I would have maybe put my foot down a little bit more and said, okay, you've got to sit down and give me like an hour of your undivided attention to go through these things. So that's definitely one of my biggest regrets is the things, it was like peeling back onion layers the entire first year. I also think part of that is he didn't have processes, he doesn't have SOPs, he didn't have job descriptions. So I do wonder, even if I had fought for that, I just don't think he would have been able to ever give me what I would have really hoped for, which is like clear roles and responsibilities and processes. So that would be one thing. Same thing like with the bank. I mean, we just didn't really renegotiate a lot because we were just so set on what the terms we wanted for financing that everything else we were just kind of laid back about. And so that also is something I probably would have fought to negotiate a lower rent on the building. I would have fought to negotiate more funds for us to have liquid tied into the loan for like operating costs. I just way underestimated how much we were going to need to fuel us through those first few months of operating costs. So those are the ones off the top of my head.
I really relate to that. I think I tend to kind of veer more in the direction that you were in of I want things to go well. I want the process to be smooth for everyone. And sometimes that means I don't always push more. I don't push maybe as much as I could. And it's so important because once the deal's done, once it's closed and once the seller's gone, like it's your business and you've got to deal with
Yeah,
whatever's going on, right? The
absolutely.
pro- the fact that the owner didn't really have processes in place, didn't have an SOP, was that something that came up during due diligence, or do you wish you had kind of gotten into that operational side of things more during that period?
Well, I think I had, well, I was excited. So, like, I heard a thing once, I think it was at church. I was like, you can only be deceived if you want it to be true. And so I feel like
Mm,
that kind of rings true. Like, I believed in this so much and wanted it so bad that I really had rose colored glasses and was like, this is quirky or old school and family run business. And, I found it almost endearing. Like everything was paper, they had no software. So I was just kind of like ready for the challenge and like ready to get in there. But again, we had conversations, but he's a very, I'm trying to think of a polite way to say it, very cost effective person. And so everything he did, he was doing himself. And so this guy was literally working from like 5 a.m. until 1 a.m. during this whole process because he's renovating the building by himself. He's fixing truck breakdowns by himself. He's going on jobs and doing work himself. So I just don't know if I could have ever tied him down. And you just don't know what to ask. So I think that's the other thing. Like now, like I said, I would have definitely pushed for it. Let's make an org chart together. Just give me your best guess of who's in charge of who here, who does what, who's your best technician, who I would have definitely asked more about the people. Um, but he was also very guarded and very didn't want us to know a lot until we bought it. Not
mm.
because he was being deceptive, he just was scared about information sharing. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I would have been able to uncover more. I guess is my long-winded way. I think if maybe it had been a non-negotiable for me, or if I had been willing to kind of go head to head with him. But I felt like the greater good was getting the business and not necessarily having contentious, like just to get what I needed from him. I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is.
Oh man, do we ever really know? It can take a
Yeah,
while to find out, right? Sometimes we only know in retrospect.
yeah,
I think you're pointing to something that I would imagine happens a lot when people are buying a business, which is there can be sort of this hidden cost on the owner side where you may not really realize until you take over the business how much the owner was actually doing. either
Oh yeah.
because, they were intentionally deceptive, which it doesn't sound like this guy was, but someone might
Yeah.
be, or because they just didn't fully explain to you everything they were doing. And then you
Yeah.
step in and you may not want to put in those same amount of hours that the
Right.
previous owner was doing, right? And now you have to figure out, am I hiring people for this? Am I getting a software? You talked about, the costs of running the business, or, starting the process once you got in there, as being higher than you were anticipating. Was it because you were kind of filling in for what the previous owner was doing? Or tell me a little bit about why that was.
That's a great question. I think it was just so actually the journey of ownership. So the company had been around for 60 years. So there was an original. We're actually the fourth owner. So there was an original owner, an owner who owned it for like 20 something years, and then the guy before us owned it for 3 years. And so in his 3 years of ownership, he never invested really anything into the business. So the guys' uniforms were insanely old. All the trucks are falling apart. Tools that the guys desperately needed to get jobs done or to be safe on the job, he had never found value in. And so, A, us trying to win over current staff, and then B, us again being big picture of like, okay, we're tripping over, pennies to save a nickel type of deal. Like, it just, this is crazy. Like, these guys, these poor guys have not great, they have no AC in their trucks, none of this. So just even on a human element, we just didn't feel comfortable continuing operating it the way that he was. He had recruited guys from his church who had a tight bond, but I don't see any other way anybody would have stayed with him, because it was not, to me, it was not okay, not acceptable the way the guys were working. So I would say that, and then investment into software. I was hesitant to invest into software immediately because I didn't want to freak anyone out by completely changing how we did things. But it just again became immediately obvious that the way it was going was not going to work. Like, there was just no way to track anything. Here, the company's been around 60 years. There's no digital records of any customers, which is so painful.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was just stuff like that, of just, oh, the dumpster needs to be emptied. That hasn't been emptied in forever. So there's a lot of cleanup. It was a lot of like cleaning it just to get it to what we felt was like a standard of work.
So, how did you close, you own the company, you're now kind of opening up this can of worms that you didn't necessarily fully understand when you were first looking at it? How did you feel at that time? Were you like, oh my gosh, why did I do this? Were you like, okay, great, a challenge. This is what I was looking for. Let's get into it.
Yeah.
Walk me through kind of your mental state at that time.
So I think day one, that the day sitting in there was my worst day. When I was just sitting there, like, I wanted to run away. Like, I was like, I can't believe I pushed this into happening. Like, why did I do this to us? Because I just walked in and nothing was what I was anticipating. Everything was worse. And like, because the office wasn't done by the time it was supposed to be done, we were working out of a single family house that was not in a good area, and everyone's on top of each other. And like, I literally just wanted to be like, never mind, never mind. Like,
Take that.
undo, undo. So that I remember vividly being a horrible day. And then I will say, you just kind of have this moment of like, whether I decide to enjoy this or not decide to enjoy this, it's going to happen. So I think I felt a responsibility because, like I said, this was all my idea, and I really pushed it into happening. So I really felt like this is where I need to show up. And like, I don't know if you've heard that speech. I forget who the coach was. That was like, you don't wait for life to get easier. You get better at doing hard things. And then as a byproduct of that, things get easier. And
Mm,
so that's kind of been my motto this whole year, is like, I just want to get better at doing hard things. And this has been a hard year. My husband lost his mom like a month into ownership very unexpectedly. And then just a couple months ago, he lost his dad very unexpectedly. So within our year of ownership, he's lost both of his parents, and then we've had some mental health stuff in our family with our kids. So it has just been one of those years where it's like, when is this gonna like, can we just catch a break for like 2 seconds? So it's been challenging, but the good thing is like my husband and I are on the same team. I don't know if it's trauma bonding or what, but we are like we've never been tighter. We're aligned. We're in agreement about everything. There's a lot of days where we go to bed and we're like, well, at least we got each other's backs. Like if this whole thing burns down, we know that we tried and we knew that the life we were living before was not us and this is us, is like facing challenges, having our back against the wall, rising to the occasion. So there has been a lot of hard things, but then there's been a lot of rewarding things where you do have an idea and you implement it and it pays off. Every single team member that was there when we bought it is still there.
Oh, wow, that's
Besides,
amazing.
we only let someone go, but like, so we've had these wins where it's like everyone told us, be ready to lose your whole staff. Um,
Mm.
that's just what happens after an acquisition, and we're not handy. My husband and I joke, like, we can't screw a light bulb in. So if we lost technicians who could work on garage doors, we wouldn't have a business. So there's things that I'm really proud of us that we didn't quit or we didn't freak out, but it's definitely been challenging. I think that would be the word I would label this year.
Oh yeah, I relate to that. Business ownership is really challenging, and I mean it depends on a lot of factors. It sounds like you ended up in a situation that required, would you say, more of your work than you were
Yeah,
expecting, more hours
yeah,
from you?
yeah, for sure.
So tell me, like those first couple months, what was your life looking like? What did your day to day look like?
Oh man, I mean, so it was summertime when we purchased. So we have four daughters, and so that was the first thing that I feel like a lot of people don't talk about is like you're immediately in a situation. We don't have any family local. We've always done everything on our own, and so that was like the first thing because it's always like, is it going to close? Is it not going to close? How much are we going to prepare? And so that was really the first domino of like, okay, we've got to figure out the kids because it's May and they're going to be out of school all summer and I have to be fully devoted to this. So that was like really the beginning was hiring someone, finding someone to make sure that the kids were okay. And that was all taken care of. And then that business starts at 7 a.m. And so it was really just rolling out of bed, getting there, and then, I mean, truly 12-hour days. I mean, without even really trying. And we had kind of thought, like, okay, there's two of us taking one owner's work. So just math, if it's mathing, there's only 24 hours in a day, we should be able to work a normal day. But you just, again, you don't anticipate all of the cleanup and the learning and just being new to everything. Like it really is drinking out of a fire hose. So I would say at the beginning, we told our kids, we said, we're not taking vacations this summer. The summer's just going to look different for our family. Dad and I have made a commitment and we're all in on it and it's going to affect you guys, but we're all sacrificing as a family to make this happen. And so the kids were pretty much like, okay, cool, like whatever, can we go back on our screen now? But we just wanted to set that expectation with them. This year is going to be different for our family. It's going to feel different. Some of the cool stuff we've done, that everything's about the business right now. So I really had a goal that by the end of summer, I would be able to work within their school hours or mostly within their school hours. Um, I've nailed that some months, most months I have not. Just reality. I'm normally plugging back in after I get done running them to their activities and working through the night. So it's a lot, but we had a startup. So I know the season that we're in, and this is just what's required at this stage until we can afford to hire ourselves out of jobs. Right now, we're just doing all the jobs, a lot of jobs.
Yeah, so tell me what your life looks like now. How does it compare to when you first acquired the business?
Sure. So one thing, I'm at home. That was a big one for me. Was coming back to working from home. It's just for us not a reality to have both of us out of the house as many hours are required. So to me, my non-negotiable was I want to be majority working from home so that I'm available as needed. I think that's something that isn't talked about as often with female, especially mom entrepreneurs, is just that we're still mom. Things have progressed a long way as a society, but like I'm getting the calls from the school nurse. I'm, I'm getting the text from the other moms about play dates like that dads just don't have. And so as much as you can try to offload some of that onto a dad, and dads have my husband's insanely involved, so I don't want to paint that a picture, but it's just different. And so I think for me, working from home is what makes that possible for me. If I'm trying to run from the office or deal with people barging into the office to talk to me about stuff or getting pulled into stuff, and I don't feel completely in control of my time, then that feels really overwhelming to me. But here I feel like at least I can be on call and then I can, I don't know, have more control of my surroundings in my day.
Sounds like it's more manageable, which is great. How did you get to that point? Were there any specific processes you implemented in the last year? How did you get yourself to the point where your day-to-day is more manageable now?
That's a good question. I think software was a huge piece of that, because having to physically do things with tickets and reconciliations and checks required just more time. So I would say software is a big component of that, which again, I had the luxury of having gone through this process with our property management company, because that's always been everyone remote, of really learning how can we drive everything online as much as possible so that if I need to work from home, I can. So I would say software, and then I would say coming into our own, like maturing as owners of this business. I feel like for the first very long time, like few months, we tried to like step into someone else's shoes and kind of run it ish how it had been run. And I feel like looking at the numbers, looking at how quickly we were turning cash, it really empowered us to be like, okay, we have got to make this business our own and quit trying to run someone else's business essentially. And so that was where it just became like, this is what's needed and I will find a way. And so that's why we very recently let go of someone who it was a tough let go. He'd been with the company for a very long time. But that was kind of the final piece for us of like, it kind of felt like he was our boss that we worked for, and it was pushing us to work more and to work outside of our normal process. And it just wasn't a culture fit ultimately. And so since we have let him go, it truly has been like a cloud has been lifted. And it's like, okay, this is our business. This is how things are going to work. And it's been the most freeing thing. So I would say part of it is just brute force of being like, I am going to work from home. So however that looks, if that means I'm working a little more hours, but I have that flexibility, that's worth it to me right now. Because then I have to figure out everything in flight. So I'm not very good about like, here's the plan, let me prepare. I'm more good about like, this is what I'm doing and I'm going to make it work. So I don't have any, unfortunately, advice other than that's how I've always gone about it. Is like if I need to do something, I do it and then I figure out how to make it happen. We also have been attending conferences that are specific to our industry. And so that is a good push of, okay, if we're not going to be physically present, this business has to be able to run. We have to be able to take 2 days out of the business and not feel like we're going to come back to fires everywhere. So we did a conference last month. We're going on another one this next week. And so that's pushed us to be like, okay, if I can't answer about this, who's going to answer that? And kind of firming up those processes. So I would say the next step for us is really defining processes, really like defining our org chart, defining roles. We hired a virtual admin who's been kind of a catch-all for all the little knick-knacky stuff, just, inputting something into software, answering calls, that kind of stuff. So I would say those are kind of the keys that have gotten us to where we feel a little bit more breathing room.
And can you talk a little bit about where the company is financially now, a year in, compared to when you bought it?
We're at the exact same. So we haven't gone up in revenue. We haven't gone down in revenue. It's just been stagnant. And so that's I should say top line. Our net is way below what it was when we purchased it because we've just been investing nonstop back into the business. My husband and I didn't take any pay out of the business until like a month ago. And so it's just very much a startup-y, like every dollar we make, it goes directly back into the business.
It sounds like you've been investing in a lot of important components. I mean, you need equipment that works, you need your employees to be happy and comfortable, and software costs money. And that's something that's allowing you to step back and then go to these conferences and be at a higher level. So I think sometimes
Yeah,
I mean, you have to put money into it, right? If you're going to grow to get the right systems in place. So tell me a little bit about like where would you like to go now? You mentioned creating an org chart. You mentioned earlier replacing yourselves eventually. What's kind of the plan for the next year?
yeah. So next year, a non-negotiable for me, like I said, is defining processes. I've just seen how powerful that is, and creating systems around things. So that is for sure going to happen this year. Really, just making sure that there's a process in place for nearly everything, and that we're clearly defining roles and who does what. So that's a big one. Another thing is really focusing on sales. Um, and not so much, it's kind of an old school way of doing business, of if I'm a repair technician of any kind, coming and being like, oh, well, I can put a band-aid on that for $100. I mean, we're going to build out kind of a sales process for our technicians to be able to give options of, I can put a band-aid on that. You'll see me again probably in a few months, or I can replace it, or I can hook you up with this brand new one that does amazing things, that currently is not in place, and it's killing us. It's killing our bottom line, because it's not the best experience for customers, because they're like, you guys were just out here. Why are you coming back out? And it's not good for us as a company to be churning that much for the cost of the fuel and the trucks and the employee, to put band-aids on things. So I would say sales and operations are probably our two core focuses for this next year.
That makes sense. I'm wondering how you don't have experience with doors. It sounds like your husband doesn't either. How are you getting comfortable with, creating a plan for your sales team? Is it through going to these conferences and finding out more information? Is there anything else that you're doing as someone who is not familiar with this industry before you bought this business?
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating. It's frustrating. It's much easier when like you've done it and then you're training someone else on it. But trying to build a process for something I have not done, or I would struggle to do because I am not as like intelligent about it, it's really difficult. And so we had always planned when we purchased the business, we're like, we're going to get coaches for this. We're going to get like we'll bring in these people. And so, but then you get hit with reality of, like I said, cash flow. And it's like, okay, well, maybe it's not cost effective for me to bring this sales expert, for our industry in. And so that's the pain that we've been experiencing. We've been very fortunate that we have made contacts in the industry who have kind of answered questions for us, or have said, hey, you can come out and tour my shop. You can see how we do things. But that's all time and that's all money still. But that's how we're kind of going about it, as instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, just kind of cheat from people who are already doing it well and learn. But yeah, the conferences are a big component of that. The conferences for us are really about the connections of being able to talk shop and see what other people are doing. So to answer your question, it's going to be multifaceted. It's going to be us probably investing in the training for ourselves, and then trickling that down to the guys.
You sound scrappy, Brittany. I appreciate it. You're making it happen,
Yeah,
using your resources. Yeah. And I mean, I think there are so many people who are willing to help you. I've felt in the ETA space, in
yeah,
business. I mean, everyone struggles and has challenges when buying a business, right? It's certainly not unique to you. So you've also started up a business, which super
mhm,
interesting now that you've had the experience of doing both, because that's a classic dilemma, that a lot of people are choosing between. Do I want to start a business, or do I want to buy a business? And I know your startup was a number of years ago. You weren't necessarily deciding between the two and you went with ETA, but
yeah.
you've had the experience of doing both. So I'm interested to learn how would you compare the experiences of starting a business to buying this business? And I guess first, tell us a little bit more. You have a property management company. Tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about how that startup went.
Yeah, it's a complex question because I've wondered this. Like, would I do acquisition again, or would I do startup again? It's difficult because the way that we did our startup was again from a very survive or die place of, if we're not getting closings or if we're not bringing on properties, we're not getting paid. So it was a very like quintessential bootstrap, toughing it out, kind of white knuckling it through the first couple of years of really having to like make a sale to do this. So it's hard if you're really well funded. I feel like that's like the difference really between either. I will say the perks of the startup is that the lessons I learned along that way have made me feel like anything is possible. If
Mhm.
you don't have grit and like sustainability after going through something like that, I don't know how you would get it because it's intense and it really is a a survive or die. I know I already used that, but it's just a completely different animal. So I would say if someone's weighing the two, it comes down to your tolerance to, and we also were big on, we didn't want to take loans. We didn't want to take on money. We wanted to always keep it ours. I don't know if that was the right call or not, but it certainly adds more challenges. But I do feel like that's a lot of learning as you go. And I mean, I didn't know anything about, I had never worked a corporate job. I didn't know anything about HR, about employees, about how things should go. I barely knew anything about real estate and property management at the time. I was pretty young. And so
Mhm.
um, learning every single thing as you go is just challenging. It's time consuming. I would say if you're young and you're hungry and you're cash strapped, that's a great way to go because the lessons you're going to learn along the way, having to learn in an element where you have no choice but to learn is a great teacher. And so I feel like an eternal student because every stage that we've grown the business has been completely different what I'm having to learn and adapt to.
Mhm.
I will say on the acquisition side, what's new for me is, like I said, our startup always felt like our business. We've always done things our way on our terms. It's always been like, well, how do we want this to be? So coming into a situation where someone else has already determined a lot of those things is a really unique balancing act because our employee retention was important to us, respecting what had been built before us, especially us coming in as like newbies, was important to us. And so I would say it required a lot more um, like holding back. Like I move obviously at a really quick pace, and I feel like that acquisition forced me to slow it down and to just sometimes let things exist and to breathe and to be more of a student of the business before I go into fix it mode. Whereas on the property management side, it's like I have an idea. I'm the visionary and the integrator. I have the idea. I'm making it happen, and I've hired a team that we're all the same vibe. We're on board. We know what we're doing here. So trying to kind of toe that balance with employees that we didn't bring on or processes that we wouldn't have done it that way. It's just a unique balance. But I would say um, I think acquisition is the easier path, even with all that being said, because if you have a book of business, at the end of the day, if you're selling and you have income coming in, it's just a lot easier to build a business that way than starting from absolutely zero and having to go out and hunt and make that income come. Especially if it's been like our company, it's been around for 60 years. So we had the luxury of our first few months. Really, it's just repeat referral business. So I don't feel like I have like a black or white, like one's better, one's worse. They're just really unique challenges. I will say that having no debt on the business, owning it 100%, there is something to be said about that on the startup path. So I don't know. I think it really comes down to the individual and obviously the size of the business they're buying. Like we bought a small business, which is harder because we are doing so much. If you're buying a bigger corporation that has people in place, or it's in an industry you're familiar with, I would imagine that makes it a little less difficult. I don't know.
You were speaking to something a minute ago that I think is probably a common situation people run into when they're buying a business, which is there's this balance between you don't want to just come in day one and start changing everything, right? Because there's a reason you bought this business. There was something about the way it was being run that made it appealing to you. You want to get to know what's going on before you make these sweeping changes. But then at some point, you do maybe have to make it your own, which it sounds
Yeah.
like is what you did and went through that process of, well, this worked for the previous owner, but this doesn't work for me and for my lifestyle and what
Mhm.
I'm looking for that business to be. But then with that, you can have challenges with staff, maybe, in that they've been working with, the seller, the owner for a certain period of time. They're used to the way things are, and you spoke to,
Mhm.
you don't know how to fix a garage door. If all your staff leaves, you're going to be
Yep.
in a tough position, right?
Yeah.
Can you walk me through anything in particular you did with regards to company culture? Because it sounds like other than the person you let go, everyone stayed around. You mentioned, you were, I don't remember the word you used, but like careful about how you introduced software. Was there anything else you did or anything that you can speak on that made it so that people wanted to stick around even after this transition?
Yeah, I think there's a few things when I try to like assess why didn't everyone just flee, because I know the owner before us lost all of his team. Like I hear that a lot, so I do try to think like why didn't that happen to us? Um, I think one thing I have recognized is that a lot of decisions I have been making up into a couple months ago have been fear based. Of like I don't want to annoy anyone because if they leave, we can't do it. And so I think part of it is us probably coddling a little bit of being like, you know, we can't afford to lose anyone because we literally cannot do this without them. And I think that's the shift I have felt lately is like I'm not doing any justice to the business when I make decisions out of fear. I have to do what aligns with us personally, whether or not it's not a right or wrong thing. It's just who we are. And so I think it probably will. The natural byproduct of that is going to be people are going to feel a difference between us just being like, oh, you need that new tool, like we got you. We're the cool uncle in the end, like we came in to save the day. Like we were doing a lot of that because we were scared of losing people. And I think as it becomes more us, I'll become more non-negotiable in what we bend to. So I would say part of it is just, maybe our lack of leadership of being like, okay, this is how it's going to be no matter what, get in or get out, but we're driving this ship this way. We haven't really done that. We've really just been like, what does everyone need? How can we, accommodate you guys? So the other part of this is my husband is like, he calls himself like Michael Scott from The Office. Like he's like, just like he likes everyone like him. He's an extrovert. He's like the nicest guy on the planet. He's wonderful with people. And so I have to attribute a lot of it to him. He was relational with the guys from day one. There was never a moment. He's the definition of like leadership by servitude and really coming in from a place of, wow, this is not okay. You guys are working like this, or, recognizing needs before they were brought to him. And listening and taking feedback. I think that goes a long way with people when they raise a flag and say, this is not okay, hearing them and then not just saying you're going to take action, but actually taking action on it, and we told the guys from the beginning that when you give us feedback, sometimes we'll take immediate action. Sometimes we're taking action, but it's like tip of the iceberg. You don't see the work that's going into that until the change happens. And sometimes it's just not going to be a good fit for our business, but we will always take your feedback. And I think having that kind of open candor and proving ourselves on that, because I think a lot of people say that, like, give us feedback, we're open to feedback, and then you get it and they get defensive, and now you're, in an awkward working situation. But we love feedback. We feel like our employees are consultants to our business. They're out there, they're doing it, they're living it. They know so much more than we do about the customer experience, the processes. So we are very open to what's working, what's not working. And then I would say some of it might just be luck. I don't know. I don't know if the guys just really enjoy the work. I don't want to give us all the credit. Some things I feel like just happen, like whether it would have happened with or without us, I don't know. I don't know if a different owner had taken over, if it would be the same outcome, but those are kind of the only things I would be able to pinpoint.
It sounds like this whole thing has been a huge learning experience for you, which I think anyone who's bought a business, who owns a business, knows it's going to be something that's going to make you grow, or you're not going to be
Mm-hmm.
successful at it. Tell me something you've learned about yourself since buying this business.
Well, gosh, I feel like I'm always learning about myself. I would say I have learned that we are not quitters. Like, I will say, if anything could have made us quit, this year should have. That we're not like curl up in a ball and lick our wound type people. I really feel like we prove that to ourselves. And sometimes having an inherent knowledge about who you are is all you need to kind of fuel you to keep going. That we have proven time and time again that we're not the type of people to back down. It's good to know that about yourself, because I have more confidence going into challenges than if I was like feeling every day like this might break me. I would say I also learned about myself, like I said, that I like to accommodate people, because I'm not an in the details person. That's a struggle for me. My ideal hire would be someone who loves details and loves all that. I can do it when it's a necessity. But I have learned, like, I'm just not in the people aspect. Like, I enjoy people, but I think I also learned that it's better for my husband to be on the people side and me to stay in the operations side, which we kind of already knew. But we had never had an experience before working in the same office as employees. We'd always been remote. Um, so I don't know. I guess I would say that I validated that I should not be the people manager. It's just not my strong suit. I'm very direct, like black and white, and you need a little bit of finesse when you're with people, and high EQ, which I feel like fortunately my husband has. I'm trying to think of what else about myself. I don't know. That's what comes to the top of my mind.
That's great.
Yeah.
Brittney, another question I have for you is, we're both women in business, women in ETA. There are not as many women in ETA as there are men, as you may have noticed. And I'm just curious what you think. It's a very complex answer. I don't think it's black and white, but why don't you think there are more women in ETA?
I don't know. I do know that for myself personally, I do have a hard time finding other women who I feel I have a lot of the same character traits as. Um, this is going to sound really like woo woo, but I learned recently about like masculine energy and feminine energy, and I do feel like I have more masculine energy, which I actually am working on, because I want to embrace more of the feminine side. But my masculine energy is probably what's gotten me to this point. So it's a hard thing to work on, because I kind of attribute it to some of my, I'm not risk adverse. I have a very high risk tolerance. I'm analytical. But I would say that a feminine energy to me is more of a flowy, not as, I don't know. I want to be careful about how I say it, because I don't want to be demeaning to anybody. I guess I will just say that I have met very few female business owners, and I have met very few who are the driver behind the business ownership or the acquisition. And all I can figure that it comes back to is just that it's more common for females to maybe be a little more risk adverse, or to be a little more timid. I also think representation matters. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you're not seeing it, I mean, I think if these like multi-level marketing things taught us anything, it's that when women see someone going out and getting something and doing it, they're highly motivated. But I just don't think you see it very often, or you don't hear about it. And even for myself, it can be isolating, because I love talking business. I love talking this stuff. And that normally means conversations with men. I would absolutely love to have women who I knew locally who we could just talk very directly and talk that way with each other. So I don't know. I think it's just hard to find your tribe or to see it modeled out. And that's why I was so appreciative of Cody Sanchez. I mean, I've only heard her on the one podcast, but I attribute it to her because she was a female who I really felt like I see a part of myself in her. And so I don't know, maybe because they don't see it as much, or it's too risky, or because, like I said, there is definitely a disproportionate amount of weight on a female traditionally to be the one who's making sure that the home front is okay. And so it's very hard to completely own that and to pursue things outside of the house that would make you sacrifice that. So I don't know.
It's complicated, right? And I hear what you're saying, and I think representation is so important. And I really appreciate you coming on this podcast because you're contributing to that. I want more people to see all different kinds of people buying and operating businesses, because I think there's so much opportunity, both from a financial perspective, but from a personal growth perspective too, in business ownership. So I really appreciate you contributing to that. Brittney, is there anything I did not ask you that you'd like to share about your ETA journey?
I don't think so. I'm here and available. So, like I said, I have relied heavily on the people who've been kind enough to give me time. And so, if anyone ever wants to reach out, I can't say I know all the answers, but I can at least try, and I'll be honest. So that's probably what I would add is if anyone hears this and there's any way at all I can be helpful to them in their journey, I would absolutely love to try.
That's fantastic. Where can people find you online?
So I have a LinkedIn profile and then email. I'm not really active on Twitter. I probably should be. I heard that's where it's at as far as all this stuff goes. So I would probably say LinkedIn's a good starting point, or just shoot me an email.
Okay, great. Well, I will make sure to link your LinkedIn in the show notes. And Brittney, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your vulnerability, sharing so much inside information into your business and the process that you've been through. I know it's going to be so helpful for other people to hear how you bought your business, the struggles you've been through, the successes you've had, just kind of your thought process along the way is really great for other people to hear, because I think sometimes it can be tempting to feel like, oh, I'm the only one that's having a hard time over here. I'm the only one that's learning leadership or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you sharing all that you did today. Thanks for checking out this episode of So You Want to Buy a Business. Be sure to check out the show notes to see how you can connect with me and with Brittney. And please like, rate, review, subscribe, all the good stuff to support this show. See you in the next episode.